Caleb was cheating on me with my best friend, Doris, and I found out at Tiffany's party. It had been going on for months, and now everything in my life is falling apart. I don't know if I can ever forgive them. I knew my husband Caleb was lying to me, and I didn't even need to check his phone to realize that. Everything came undone at Tiffany's party, where secrets never remain buried for long. It was one of those sultry summer evenings. Kyla was preparing for Tiffany's birthday party. The glamorous host, who always seemed to have her life in order, had invited a whole group of friends from their suburban neighborhood. Kyla knew Tiffany from college, and while Tiffany loved throwing these fancy parties, Kyla always felt somewhat uneasy during such parties. Tonight, Kyla was nervous as never before. In front of the mirror, brushing her blonde hair and adjusting a simple navy blue dress, she could not avoid thinking of Caleb. Her husband had been gone for weeks, perhaps months. Something had shifted between them since their 8th anniversary celebration. "I'll meet you at the party," Caleb had said to her earlier that day. His voice short. "I have some work to wrap up at the office." Kyla nodded, but the pit in her stomach said differently. Caleb had been so attentive, always making time and coming home smiling. Lately, he has been spending more nights away from the house and more hours locked away in his study. And the excuses? Well, they were beginning to add up. Sighing loudly, she felt a growing distance between them as she grabbed her purse and keys. She had tried talking to him several times, but each conversation seemed to culminate in vague reassurances or frustration. Tonight, though, at least that's what she kept telling herself, she would enjoy the party. When Kyla finally arrived, Tiffany's house was as beautiful as ever. The tasteful decorations, the appetizers arranged with mathematical precision, and the soft candlelight reflecting from the polished wood floor. Tiffany knew how to host a party. It was one of those places where everything was easy. Even though Kyla knew behind it all, Tiffany worked her tail off to keep that illusion of perfection going. No sooner had she entered than Tiffany appeared, bright red and shining. "Kyla, sweetie, you look great," she said, more boisterous than usual, tugging her into a squeeze. "Where's Caleb?" Kayla smiled. "He'll be here soon. He said he had some work to finish." Tiffany raised a perfectly manicured eyebrow but didn't press the issue. "Well, you know, Caleb, always working too hard. Go grab a drink and make yourself at home. Tonight's gonna be fun." Kyla watched as Tiffany floated off to greet more guests. She made her way toward the bar, where the familiar faces of their friend group mingled. Lori, her closest friend, was laughing with Russell near the appetizers. Bradley was in deep discussion and stood near the bar with Lucas. At the same time, Alexis snapped away with her camera at the well-presented food for her Instagram. Meanwhile, Doris was standing at one side, not looking as comfortable as the rest. She occasionally cast sideways glances around the room, looking as though she would instead have been elsewhere. She reached for a glass of wine, hoping it might diffuse the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach. The party was going full blast, but somehow Kyla couldn't help feeling disconnected from the laughter and chatter around her. Early signs. As Kyla moved around the room, she couldn't help but notice that Doris was acting strangely. Although she was usually quieter than the others, she was friendly nonetheless, making light conversation with Kyla about her garden or simply how her job was going. Tonight, though, Doris wasn't looking anyone in the eyes, fidgeting with her drink and not talking to anyone. It wasn't just Doris, though. Bobby, one of Caleb's old friends, had been off the last few months. Always outgoing at other gatherings, telling stories and cracking jokes, he was now withdrawn, almost as if carrying the weight of a secret. Tonight, his looks across the table to Kyla came frequently, yet hesitantly, yet hesitantly, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite bring himself to it. Always observant, Lori noticed Kyla's distant mood and sidled beside her. "What's going on?" "You're a million miles away." Kyla sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "I don't know, Lori. Something's been off with Caleb for a while now. He's distant, distracted. I feel like I don't even know him anymore." Lori frowned, her brows knitting together. "Have you talked to him? Like, really talked?" "I've tried," Kyla said. "Whenever I bring it up, he shuts me down or says it's work stress. But it feels like something more. I can't shake this feeling he's hiding something." Lori nodded, her face sympathetic. "Men can be frustrating that way. But don't jump to conclusions yet. Maybe it really is just stress. You know how Caleb is about his work?" Smiling, Kyla was glad for Lori's reassurance, but a seed of unease remained. Things were not all right, and deep in her heart, she feared it was more than work. Tension mounts. The party was now in full swing, and Tiffany was again the hub, around which everyone else circled. Kyla sat, sipping her wine silently, watching her friends' laughter and dancing. Everyone was having a great time, but Kyla had this nagging feeling. She stood by the large bay window, staring as the sky slowly darkened. He approached behind her, his face tight, and looked like he hadn't seen sleep in days. "Hey, Kyla," Bobby said, low and hesitant. "Hey, Bobby," Kyla replied, turning to face him. "How's it going?" Bobby shifted uneasily, fidgeting with his hands in his pockets. "Listen, I've been wanting to talk to you about something important." Kyla's heart skipped a beat. Bobby's serious tone sent alarm bells ringing in her head. "What is it?" Bobby glanced around as if making sure no one else was listening. "It's about Caleb," he said quietly. "And Doris?" Kyla's stomach dropped. "Doris? What about her?" Before Bobby could answer, the front door swung open, and Caleb walked in, a flush on his face, his hair a bit tousled. His eyes darted around the room, falling on Bobby and then Kyla. There was a moment of something there, perhaps guilt in his gaze. "Hey," Caleb replied a little too calmly. "I'm sorry I'm late. I got caught up with some stuff." Kyla was scared as she looked towards him. "Caleb, can we talk?" Caleb seemed to hesitate momentarily, his glance darting to Bobby before nodding. "Yeah, sure, let's go somewhere quiet." The confrontation. Out into the backyard, Kyla walked Caleb, his cool night air offering little comfort against the storm brewing inside her. She stood on the patio, arms crossed, staring at Caleb, who avoided her gaze. "Caleb, what's going on?" she quavered, her voice shaking with fear and anger. "You've been distant for months. You barely talk to me anymore. And now Bobby's telling me something's happening with Doris? What is it?" Caleb ran a hand through his hair and exhaled slowly. "Kyla, I don't want to do this here." "Do what?" Kyla snapped. "Just tell me the truth, Caleb. I deserve to know." For a moment, Caleb said nothing. He just stood there, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been seeing Doris." The words hit Kyla like a physical blow. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Caleb swallowed hard. "I never wanted it to happen, Kyla. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Tears welled up in Kyla's eyes as she glared across the table at the man. She thought she knew. How long? she asked, her voice shaking. How long has this been going on? Caleb hesitated before answering. A few months. The breath caught in Kyla's throat. Months. She could barely get the words out. You've been seeing her for months, and you didn't think to tell me? I didn't want to hurt you, Caleb said, regret lacing into his voice. I swear, I never meant for it to happen like this. Never meant for it to happen, Kyla echoed, her voice rising in disbelief. You've been cheating on me for months and you never meant for it to happen? Caleb stepped closer to her, but Kyla stepped away, shaking her head. Don't, she said, her voice cold. Don't come near me. The heartbreak. Inside, the party continued, but to Kyla it seemed everything had come to a standstill. The trust issues ran so deep that the rug was pulled from under her feet. Her whole world was crumbling, and she was unable to do anything to stop it. With a face streaked with tears, Kyla turned away from Caleb as if she didn't even have the strength to look at him. I trusted you, she whispered. I trusted you with everything, Caleb. How could you do this? Things haven't gone right between us in quite some time, Kyla. He tried to explain, his voice breaking. I didn't know how to fix it. Kyla laughed harshly, trying to wipe her tears away with the back of her hand. So, instead of talking to me, you decided to start an affair with my friend. That's your solution. I know it was wrong, Caleb admitted, his voice full of remorse. But it wasn't serious. I swear, it didn't mean anything. Kyla spun around, her eyes ablaze with anger. It didn't mean anything. You have been lying to me for months, sleeping with Doris behind my back, and it didn't mean anything. Caleb just hung his head low, refusing to even look at Kyla. I'm sorry, Kyla. I'm so sorry. Unveiling the betrayal. Just then, the sliding glass door behind them opened. Tiffany stepped out onto the patio, her eyes wide with curiosity. Is everything okay out here? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Kyla quickly wiped her face, not wanting Tiffany to see her crying. We're fine, she said, her voice far from steady. Tiffany raised an eyebrow. She glanced across at Caleb before turning back to Kyla. Are you certain? You seem upset? Just then, as Kyla opened her mouth to speak, the door swished open again, and out stepped Doris, whose face drained white. Kyla, I am so sorry, she whispered, her voice shaking. I never wanted this to happen. Kyla's heart lurched in her chest as she stared at Doris, the woman she had considered a friend. You? You're the one Caleb's been seeing. Doris nodded, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. Kyla's voice quivered with rage. But you did, Doris. You hurt me more than I ever thought possible. Doris began sobbing, her hands over her face. I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I won't, Kyla said, with an icicle of cold. I'll never forgive you. The weight of the betrayal had finally come down on Kyla's shoulders, but along with it, a strange sense of clarity washed over her. This was not her fault. Caleb had done what he had done, and Doris had done what she did. They both betrayed her, and Kyla refused to be the victim anymore. I want you both out of my life, Kyla said, her voice firm despite the tears falling. I'm done. Aftermath. Over the following weeks, Kyla's life almost seemed to turn upside down. Caleb was no longer living in the house, so she was alone in their home. Everything was vacant, a reminder of what had been taken away. As expected, the news of the affair made the rounds due to the gossip extraordinaire Tiffany. Everyone knew what was happening. Their friends aligned themselves by taking Caleb's side, where a stand was taken that he was only going through something, or by taking Kyla's side, where they supported her through the ordeal. It was Russell, however, who was the biggest surprise for her. Always a friend, post-betrayal, Russell had become an anchor, strong and quick, for Kyla. He would show up after work, bringing dinner or sitting silently while she processed her emotions. "You really don't have to do this," she told him one evening as they sat outside the porch watching the sunset. "I'm really okay, see?" Russell shook his head, his eyes soft. "You don't need to be okay, Kyla. It's all right not to be." Kyla smiled weakly, glad for his company. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Russell looked at her deadpan. "You are way stronger than you think, Kyla. You will get through this." Months passed, and Kyla slowly rebuilt her life. Though the scars of betrayal were deep, she threw herself into work, friendships, and time spent alone learning to live without Caleb. Still, the emptiness that lingered in the house was impossible to ignore. Caleb had reached out several times, sending messages she had not replied to. He'd even appeared at the house once, but Kyla didn't let him in. She knew she could never trust him again. Yet they had an unfinished feeling. Questions haunted her, questions to which she wasn't quite sure she wanted the answers. Could they ever find closure? Was there even a part of their past that was real? One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, Kyla sat on her front porch watching the world grow quiet around her. A soft breeze carried the scents of blooming flowers from her garden. A small comfort in her life's chaos. She sipped her tea and stared at her phone, Caleb's last message sitting unread on the screen. "Can we talk? I miss you." Her thumbs hovered over the message, her heart torn between a deep-seated desire to listen and knowing how much it would hurt when she opened a door she had fought hard to close. Just then, a car pulled into her driveway. Kyla's breath caught as she watched Caleb emerge, the contours of his face gaunt and his expression etched with the same regret that had weighed him down for months. "Kyla!" he called softly, stepping toward her. Kyla rose, the stiffness in her body only spreading. "What are you doing here, Caleb?" "I needed to see you," he said, his tone pleading. "I've been a mess without you. I know I don't deserve it, but can we talk, please?" Kyla looked at him, her heart racing. The anger she had felt months ago had dulled into a weary sadness. She saw the brokenness in Caleb's eyes, yet how could she forget the pain he had caused her? Could she ever forgive him? Could she let herself be vulnerable again? She cast her gaze on her hands as the moment's weight pressed down upon her. "I don't know if I can do this, Caleb," she whispered. "I don't know if I'll ever trust you again." Caleb took another step closer, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Kyla. I would do anything to get it back. Anything to make it right." Kyla's heart ached with the uncertainty of it all. She wanted to believe him, but the wound still felt fresh. "I don't know," she repeated, her voice shaking. They stood there clinging to the dying light, trapped between their past and unknown futures. Caleb reached out, his hand less than an inch from Kyla's. But Kyla did not move. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unsaid words and regret over what could have been or may not have been. "Maybe it's too late," Kyla said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "Maybe we can't fix this." Caleb's face fell, and he nodded, recognizing the profundity of what she was saying. "I love you," he said softly, his tone filled with sorrow. "But I'll go if that's what you want." Kayla swallowed hard. "But I'll go if that's what you want." Kayla swallowed hard. She said nothing, unsure whether she wanted him to stay or leave. She knew at that second that she wasn't ready to make such a choice. Not yet. Turning and walking away from her, Caleb returned to his car while Kyla stood there, watching him go. Part of her wished she could call him back and give him another chance, but another part was too terrified of what that might entail. The heartache of betrayal had been left heavy and unresolved within her. As Kyla's car vanished, Kyla was left to her lonesome self, standing in the fading twilight with no promise of what her tomorrow would hold. Finding out my husband had lied to me shattered me into pieces. Watching him walk away tonight, I realized I may never know if I can forgive him or if I even want to. Months passed, and that storm of anger and sadness really did begin to settle into a quiet ache in Kyla's chest. She went about her day's wraith, like working, coming home, trying to pretend she could rebuild her life. But the truth was, the betrayal had changed her in ways she wasn't sure she would ever be able to repair. Caleb had moved on. At least, he had pretended to. She hadn't heard it from him, though. A mutual friend had told her he was seeing someone new, but he hadn't made any big fuss about it. Doris had long since moved out of town, and Kyla was angry with no one other than herself. Often enough, she found herself speculating on how she might have done something differently if she had seen the signs sooner and had been a better wife. Yet, all those thoughts led her on a path of self-doubt and pain. On this night, with the pinch of autumn cutting through, Kyla would find herself sitting in her living room, staring at the pile of divorce papers on the coffee table. She had filled them out weeks ago but couldn't sign them. Something in her still clung to the past, the memories of what she thought life was like, the love she thought was real. The phone rang, jerking her back from her reverie. She turned toward the caller ID, Russell. He'd been a constant presence in her life since everything fell apart, offering support when she needed it and giving her space when she didn't. "Hey," she said softly, answering the call. "Hey," Russell's voice came across the line, warm but tinged with worry. "I just wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" Kyla let out a sigh, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know. Some days are okay, others not so much." There was a pause at the other end. "Have you signed the papers yet?" Kyla's eyes drifted to the divorce documents again, her heart heavy. "No, not yet." "Kyla, you need to move on from this. You deserve better than what he did to you." "I know," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. Russell's voice gentled. "I'll be here for you anyway. You know that, right?" Kyla nodded, though he was behind her. "I know. Thanks, Russell." After she hung up, Kyla sat silently, staring at the papers. She knew Russell was right. She needed to let go and move on. The weight of the decision felt too heavy. Signing those papers felt like closing the door to a life she once dreamed of, one she had fought hard to build. Tears welled up in her eyes as she reached for the pen and, shaking, pressed it to the paper. Just as she was about to sign her name, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Caleb. "Can we talk? I don't deserve it, but I need to see you." Kyla's heart raced as she stared at the message, her mind flooded with messy emotions. She wanted the much-needed closure, but she wasn't sure if talking to Caleb would give it to her or reopen old wounds. She'd tried hard to move on, but it still hurt, raw and unhealed. She set the pen down, unable to make herself sign the papers. Maybe she would go see him just once more. Hearing him explain, Hearing his side would give her the peace she needed, or it could break her all over again. With a heavy heart, Kyla stood up, wiping away her tears. She really didn't know what to do from here on out. And as the night wore on, the cold began to set in. She could feel this sense of finality wrapping itself around her. The future was uncertain. But there was one sure thing. Whatever happened from now on, she would never be the same again. I learned my husband lied to me, and it broke me. As I stood there tonight, holding those divorce papers, I realized that no matter what I do, the pieces of my heart may never come back together.